So good would need to look like China agreeing to lift its ban on buying American soybean, which has come in retaliation to Trump's trade war on China, and looks like being in the mix in these negotiations that Scott.
Soybean fields across America are still green and stretching for miles, but behind that peaceful picture is a crisis farmers say they've never seen before. Prices have collapsed to record lows, exports have vanished, and grain elevators are turning growers away, leaving entire families on the edge of financial ruin. If one of America's most important crops is falling apart this fast, what does it mean for the farmers, the food system, and the country's future? When you talk to soybean farmers right now, there's a kind of exhaustion in their voices that's hard to ignore. These are people who've spent decades planting, harvesting, hedging, storing, doing everything right, everything they were told they needed to do to survive in a low-margin business. And yet today, many of them are looking across hundreds or thousands of acres of soybeans and realizing something devastating: they're losing almost everything. Because soybean prices in the U.S. haven't just dipped, they've crashed to record lows. To understand why this is such a big deal, you have to understand soybeans themselves. They might not sound glamorous, but soy is one of the most important crops in the world. It's everywhere: in animal feed for poultry and livestock, in your cooking oil, in tofu, in biodiesel, in everything from crayons to industrial lubricants. And the U.S.? It's one of the world's biggest soybean producers. For decades, that put American farmers in a strong, stable position. They grew the beans, the world bought the beans, and everyone moved on. But here's the part most people don't realize: American soy farmers depend heavily on exports, especially to China. For years, China has been the biggest soybean buyer on Earth. There's a reason the American Soybean Association practically has China on speed dial. Without that demand, the entire system starts to wobble, and right now, it's wobbling hard.
Get a crop loan, you've put all your equipment up, all your equity in your ground, you've put your home up, your pickup truck, everything up. And if they can't pay out, and if they've rolled over any debt from last year, they're going to call the auctioneer and they're going to...
Soybean farming has always been a game of thin margins. Farmers pour in huge amounts of money long before they see a single dollar in return. Seed, fertilizer, pesticides, machinery payments, diesel, labor. A farmer might spend hundreds of dollars per acre before the crop even emerges, and then they hope, pray, and wait. If the yield is good and the global market is healthy, they might make it. If either of those things fail, the numbers can turn negative fast. This is why export access isn't just helpful, it's essential. When farmers can sell abroad, especially to high-volume markets like China, they get better prices. When those markets dry up, well, you're seeing the result now. So what actually happened? What caused this collapse? The turning point came with trade tensions, tariffs, and political retaliation. When the U.S. slapped tariffs on various Chinese goods, China hit back. And one of their favorite pressure points has always been agriculture, specifically soybeans. China placed steep duties on U.S. soybeans, making them significantly more expensive compared to beans from Brazil or Argentina. And China didn't just threaten to buy less, they actually did it. Between January and July of 2025, U.S. soybean exports to China dropped nearly 39%, falling to about 5.9 million metric tons. That isn't a slow decline, that's a free fall. For farmers, it felt like watching your best customer slam the door in your face and walk across the street to your competitor.
I'm at $172 an acre loss. I mean, the farmer can't continue to produce a crop below the cost of production, and that's where we're at, and we don't have anywhere to sell it. We're in a terrible...
And as the demand dropped, prices followed. Soybean prices have fallen roughly 40% since 2022. Think about that, nearly half the value wiped out. And what makes this even worse is that everything else farmers need is still expensive. Fuel costs remain high. Fertilizer, despite some fluctuations, is nowhere near cheap. Machinery parts and repairs? Up. Labor? Up. Insurance? Up. So farmers are spending more to produce a crop that's worth less. Futures and spot prices for soybeans are now at their lowest inflation-adjusted levels since the early 2000s. You'd have to go back decades to find a time when soybean farming offered this little financial return. The painful part is that this isn't because farmers suddenly forgot how to farm. It's not weather, disease, or drought. It's economics, geopolitics, and global competition crushing them from all sides. And the problems don't stop at low prices. Even after farmers harvest their beans, they're running into another problem. No one is accepting them. Grain elevators across the Midwest, places that normally buy and store soybeans, are telling farmers they're full. Why? Because beans aren't moving, exporters aren't buying, processing plants don't need more. The international market demand has slowed dramatically, so elevators literally have no open bins left. They're clogged with a product nobody is rushing to purchase. Imagine working an entire year for a paycheck, and when payday comes, your boss says, "Sorry, I don't have space to store your work, and I also can't afford to pay you for it right now, maybe in a few months." That's exactly what farmers are facing. So what happens then? Farmers store soybeans on their own farms, if they're lucky enough to have the space. But that's expensive too. Grain bins cost money. Fans, dryers, electricity, everything adds up. Some farmers are storing beans in old, dented bins that haven't been used in years. Others are turning to temporary plastic tube storage on the ground, basically giant bags that hopefully keep the beans dry. But storing beans longer creates another problem. Cash flow slows to a trickle. Farmers need cash constantly: loan payments, next year's inputs, property taxes, insurance, machinery repairs. When they have soybeans but no one to buy them, they're stuck. They can't pay off operating loans from last season, and that makes it harder to secure financing for the next. The banks start asking harder questions. The stress compounds. Every single month of delay pushes farmers deeper into debt. And as if all that wasn't enough, there's another emerging issue. Global competition is getting fiercer. Brazil, especially, has become a soybean giant. They produce at massive scale with lower costs, and they've strengthened their trade ties with China. While U.S. farmers are fighting through tariff fallout, Brazil is selling record shipments. Some American farmers say they're being priced out of their own industry. Others are saying this is the worst market situation they've seen in their lifetime. And many of these farmers lived through the 1980s farm crisis. The emotional toll is real. Some farmers are quietly walking away from land that's been in their families for generations. Others are taking off farm jobs to stay afloat. Many say they're working harder than ever, but seeing almost nothing in return. And the really painful part? Soybeans aren't a luxury crop. They're a backbone crop. When soy collapses, rural communities collapse with it. Equipment dealers, grain haulers, feed suppliers, banks, rural restaurants, hardware stores, everything and everyone feels the shockwave. So where does this go from here? Farmers are calling for tariff relief, new trade deals, expanded market access in Asia, and stronger domestic processing capacity. They're asking for export programs, government purchases, updated crop insurance, and anything that will help stabilize prices long enough for them to breathe again.
As Politico puts it, in the president's trade war with China. Since May, China has not purchased a single U.S. soybean, not a one, according to the American Soybean Association, turning instead to Brazil and Argentina.
If you sit down with a soybean farmer right now, at a kitchen table, in a pickup truck, or out by the grain bins, you don't just hear frustration. You hear fear, you hear exhaustion, and honestly, you hear heartbreak. Because soybean prices haven't just dipped a little, they've crashed to record lows, and thousands of U.S. farmers feel like they're watching their entire livelihood slip through their fingers. Soybeans might sound like just another crop, but in rural America, they're the backbone of everything. The U.S. is one of the biggest soybean producers on the planet. These beans go into animal feed, cooking oil, tofu, biodiesel, plastics, industrial materials, you name it. And for decades, American farmers relied on one massive customer to keep everything moving smoothly: China. They were the world's biggest soybean buyer, and for years, U.S. beans flowed there without much trouble. In fact, a large portion of U.S. exports existed almost entirely because China needed huge volumes every year. It kept prices stable. It kept rural economies alive. But farming soybeans has always been a low-margin business. The costs come first: seed, fertilizer, fuel, machinery payments, chemicals, insurance, and labor. Farmers pour in tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands of dollars before they earn a penny. The only way they make it work is with good yields and strong export markets. When either one breaks, the entire system starts to crack, and right now, both have broken at the same time.
Yes, it is right now.
But for soybean farmers like Scott Gaffner, what's usually a time of reward is now a season of worry.
The great majority of it coming from this area would go to China.
The collapse began with trade tensions. When the U.S. slapped tariffs on Chinese goods, China retaliated hard, and they went straight after U.S. soybeans, placing steep duties that made American beans far more expensive than South American ones. So China simply shifted its buying to Brazil and Argentina. And once a buyer as huge as China builds new supply chains, they don't switch back easily, not even if relations improve later. Between January and July 2025, U.S. soybean exports to China dropped nearly 39%, falling to around 5.9 million metric tons. That kind of drop is catastrophic. It's not just a slow decline, it's like someone pulled the rug out from under the entire industry. And when demand collapses, prices collapse. Soybean prices have fallen roughly 40% since 2022. That's almost half the value gone. Futures prices and spot prices today are at their lowest inflation-adjusted levels since the early 2000s. Meanwhile, fuel, fertilizer, machinery parts, and transportation all cost more than ever. Tariffs on certain inputs have pushed costs even higher. So farmers are paying record expenses to grow a crop that's bringing in record low prices. That financial squeeze is brutal. Many farmers aren't just earning less, they're actively losing money with every acre they plant. Lenders estimate that more than 90% of farmers will see their debt loads rise this year. Interest rates haven't helped either. Higher borrowing costs push already fragile balance sheets into dangerous territory. Just look at Illinois, one of the largest soybean-producing states. Analysts say farmers there may lose up to $64 per acre because of the low prices and weak exports. Multiply that by 1,000 acres, or 2,000, or 5,000. And remember, the bills don't stop. Loans still need to be paid. Equipment still breaks. Seeds still need to be ordered for next year. Property taxes still come. It's no wonder some farmers are lying awake at night wondering if they can make it another season. And the emotional toll is real too. Commentators warn that rural America is on the brink of another crisis. Foreclosures are rising. Bankruptcies are climbing. Farm suicides, already a painful and growing issue, are becoming more common again. You can feel the stress hanging in the air in small towns across the Midwest.
They buy 12 or 14 billion dollars worth of soybeans from the Argentinians after the tax holiday. And here's the caveat to it. They give $2.30 over the November board, while I'm getting 50 cents under.
A lot of farmers also feel deeply betrayed. Many supported political leaders who promised to protect agriculture, secure better trade deals, and open new markets. They were told bailouts would keep them afloat. They were told new agreements would replace lost Chinese demand. But what many farmers say they're seeing instead is favoritism toward other countries, like Argentina, getting better access and better deals. Meanwhile, American farmers are told to wait for frameworks and slow negotiations that do nothing to solve the immediate, painful crisis happening right now. It's hard not to feel abandoned when your own government promises support but delivers delays. And it's not just the farms taking the hit. Soybeans support entire local economies. When soybean prices fall and exports collapse, the impact spreads like shockwaves. Equipment dealers sell fewer tractors. Truckers get fewer loads. Grain elevators cut hours. Chemical suppliers see fewer orders. Restaurants in small towns get emptier. Schools struggle with declining tax revenue. It becomes a cycle. Fewer exports mean fewer jobs mean less spending, and less spending means rural decline. But why exactly did this collapse hit so hard? The trade war didn't happen in a vacuum. While the U.S. government was busy fighting tariff battles, South America was quietly expanding. Brazil especially used the opportunity to grow into a global soybean powerhouse. Massive investments went into ports, railways, storage, and production. Their yields grew, their acres expanded, their prices undercut U.S. farmers, and China increasingly turned to Brazil as its main supplier. Once those supply chains were built, ships, contracts, partnerships, logistics networks, they became permanent. Even if tariffs disappeared tomorrow, China would keep buying heavily from Brazil. Relationships matter in global trade, and South America stepped into the role the U.S. once held. At the same time, U.S. farmers actually produced strong yields in many states. Normally, that's good news, but when supply stays high while demand crashes, prices plummet even worse. It's the classic economic trap. Too many beans, too few buyers. Add rising interest rates, climbing debt, expensive inputs, and shrinking export markets, and you end up with the crisis we're seeing today. Farmers aren't just short on profit, they're running out of runway. Ask them what they need and they'll tell you plainly. Real market access, not promises. Strong trade agreements, not vague frameworks. Relief now, not years from now. Because if nothing changes soon, a lot of farms won't survive to see the recovery. And this isn't dramatic exaggeration. This is what farmers themselves are saying. They're watching record harvests rot in storage. They're losing money every time they fuel up the combine. They're arguing with banks, delaying bills, stretching every dollar as far as it can go. Some farmers in their 60s are admitting they may be the last generation to farm their family land. Others are telling their kids, who once dreamed of taking over the farm, to find a different future. So yes, when people say U.S. soybean farmers are losing everything, it's not a headline, it's a reality. Prices are at record lows. Markets are slipping away, costs are climbing, debt is rising. And rural America is feeling every bit of that pain.
Grain elevators are full, which means they're not accepting any more new soybeans in on trucks. I don't have a grain storage capability, so I have to cut my combines off, people. That's how real this is. I've been farming.
If you really want to understand what's happening to U.S. soybean farmers right now, forget the charts and market reports for a moment. Just listen to the farmers themselves. One of them, John Boyd Jr., a veteran farmer who has been working the land for more than 4 decades, put it in the bluntest, most heartbreaking way. I'm not harvesting. Grain elevators are full. I've been farming for 42 years, and I never had calls from grain elevators saying they were not taking soybeans. This is real. And that's exactly it. This is real. This isn't some temporary dip or a normal market cycle. This is something much deeper and far more frightening. U.S. soybean farmers are facing some of the lowest prices in decades. They're running out of storage, running out of buyers, running out of time, and in many cases, running out of hope. Soybeans aren't just another crop. They're one of America's biggest agricultural powerhouses. They go into everything: animal feed, cooking oil, tofu, biodiesel, industrial products. And for years, the U.S. was one of the world's top producers, selling massive quantities abroad, especially to China. That export demand kept rural economies alive. It kept family farms going generation after generation. But soybean farming is a game of thin margins. A farmer spends enormous amounts of money up front on seed, fertilizer, machinery, repairs, fuel, chemicals, labor, long before harvest. And because those costs keep rising every year, the only way a farmer makes money is if prices stay strong and global markets stay open. If either one collapses, the farm sinks fast. Right now, both have collapsed. Everything started unraveling the moment the trade war escalated. The U.S. imposed tariffs on China. China retaliated by putting massive duties on U.S. soybeans. Suddenly, American beans became too expensive. So China simply shifted to Brazil and Argentina, countries that took the opportunity to expand their soybean production like never before. And the numbers tell the story. From January to July 2025, U.S. soybean exports to China fell almost 39%, dropping to about 5.9 million metric tons. That is not a small adjustment. That is a complete market breakdown. When your biggest customer turns away, everything else begins to fall apart. Prices followed. Soybean prices today are down roughly 40% from their 2022 levels. Analysts say futures and cash prices are at their lowest real value in more than 20 years. And what makes this so painful is that the cost of growing soybeans hasn't dropped at all. Fertilizer is still expensive, diesel is still expensive, machinery repairs are still expensive, transportation is still expensive, tariffs on certain imports have even pushed input costs higher. So farmers are stuck paying record high expenses for record low returns, and there's simply no way to make those numbers work. It's no surprise then that financial stress is exploding. Lenders expect that more than 90% of farmers this year will see their overall debt rise. For soy and corn growers especially, the margin squeeze is brutal. In Illinois, some farmers are projected to lose as much as $64 per acre. Imagine farming 1,000 acres and waking up every day knowing that, no matter how hard you work, the math guarantees you'll lose tens of thousands of dollars. It's devastating. And the human cost is showing. Foreclosures in rural areas are climbing. Bankruptcies are increasing. Farm suicides, already heartbreakingly common, are rising again. When you live on land your family has worked for 70, 80, sometimes 100 years, the idea of losing it isn't just financial, it's emotional, it's personal, it's generational. A lot of farmers feel abandoned too. They say they supported political leaders who promised to fight for them, secure better trade deals, reopen Chinese markets, expand export opportunities, and protect family farms. But now, many feel like those promises have evaporated. They see frameworks, negotiations, and press conferences, but none of that pays the bills. None of that solves the immediate crisis. They have a crop they can't sell, grain elevators that won't take it, and banks that expect payments no matter what. You can hear this frustration loudly in interviews. When a national editor and former congressman was asked whether policymakers were doing enough to protect farmers, his response was cautious but telling. He talked about long-term strategies, balancing trade relationships, and increasing domestic processing capacity. But farmers listening to that shook their heads, because none of that helps them today. None of it helps them keep their land out of foreclosure next month. None of it helps them when grain elevators call and say, "We're full, we're not accepting soybeans." And that storage issue is becoming a crisis of its own. Across the Midwest, many grain elevators have stopped taking soybeans altogether. Some are literally overflowing because exports fell so sharply. Others say there's simply no point accepting beans when there is no buyer lined up. So farmers are stuck holding their harvest in on-farm bins, if they even have the space. Storing soybeans costs money, drying them costs money, and every day they sit, farmers get deeper into a cash flow hole. And remember, soybean farming doesn't exist in isolation. Entire rural economies depend on it. Equipment dealers, trucking companies, grain haulers, fuel suppliers, fertilizer companies, restaurants, schools, local newspapers, hardware stores. When soybean prices crash, everything around them crashes too. Fewer exports mean fewer jobs, and fewer jobs mean communities start to hollow out. It's a chain reaction, and it's already happening. To make matters worse, global competition keeps tightening. Brazil and Argentina have expanded production massively. Brazil now dominates China's soybean imports. And once those supply chains were built, new ports, new rail lines, new contracts, they became permanent. Even if the U.S. and China patched up their differences tomorrow, China has no reason to abandon the cheaper, more reliable supply they built in South America. So where does this leave American farmers? Stuck, trapped, trying to survive a crisis they didn't create and can't control. And that's why the emotional toll is so real. Generations of farmers who spent their entire lives working the land are suddenly facing the possibility that they may be the last. Some have already said they're not planting soybeans next season. Others are leaving fields fallow. A few are selling equipment they spent decades paying off. Many don't want their children to take over the farm anymore, not because they don't love farming, but because they don't want their kids to live through this kind of pain. When farmer John Boyd Jr. said, "This is real," he didn't mean the numbers. He meant the fear, the uncertainty, the heartbreak of watching a lifetime of work, and in some cases, multiple lifetimes, slip away. This crisis isn't about soybeans. It's about people, families, towns, communities. And right now, those communities are in trouble.